Hi everyone and welcome to this code-based session. Today is Monday the 7th of January 2019 and we are currently looking at exercise 51 from Z.A. Shaw's Learn Python 3 the Hard Way. So yesterday we looked at how to set up a Flask web server inside your home directory, and we saw how we could access that portfolio web server directly via your browser by going to your username.codebase.tech, and we saw how to put your portfolio in debug mode. So number one, if you have a bug, you can actually see what that issue is directly from the browser, and secondly as well, it enables you to modify your portfolio and see the changes being reflected directly inside the browser. And today we'll take a look at how to get input from the browser. So, you know, that's very much the same as when you go on any website and you type something in and then you click some submit button. So it's a very common thing to do, and we'll take a look at how to do this in your portfolio site. So let's jump right in. So let me just clear this for now. And by opening an empty file, and let's have a really quick overview of how the web works. So let's say we've got step A, and step A is essentially being in your browser, and you type in, let's say, HTTPS, in this case it's test.com, okay? Now, actually, this is more of a diagram. So we'll say we have your browser here, and then now we have a connecting step called A, okay? And the connecting step called A is essentially connecting your browser with the network interface. So back in the day, like, a network interface used to be an actual card that you had to slot inside your computer. Now everything is embedded inside your laptop and inside your phones. But that used to be an actual piece of hardware, and it still has, you know, some software that's tied straight into your kernel, etc. And then we have B, and B is essentially connecting your network interface. Interface is now connected to the internet. And when we say the internet, you know, the internet is a very complex beast, but at the core of what the internet is, you know, you can just think of the internet as a bunch of computers, exactly like your own, that are all interconnected, okay? It's a valid representation. Obviously, that's not what it is anymore, but that is actually a valid representation, and that's how it was meant to be from the very beginning. And now we have step C that essentially connects. Maybe I'll try and just do this differently. We have your browser. Yeah, I think that arrow is confusing, so I'll just say your browser, and then we have node A that connects you to your network interface. Then we have node B, and that connects you to the internet. And then we have node C, edge C, and edge C connects you to my server, which in this case is actually the codebase.tech server. And we then have edge D, which connects us to the web apps, index.get. Again, I think, referring to yesterday's, I think he means hello world.get, but it's fine, we'll just write index.get, okay? Okay, so I've just tried to tidy this up a little bit, and let's take a look at the flow of what's happening here. So in your browser, you type in a URL for a website, and that connects you to your network interface, and your network interface sends a request to the internet. That really ought to be in quotes. And then the request is routed to your server, which is codebase.tech, and that's done as we spoke about yesterday. We resolve the address of the server, the IP address, via something called a DNS, and then your request gets sent to that particular server. And then to be complete, there is a step missing here. In the book it really should say that there's a network interface, and then there's another step that connects the server's network interface to the web apps, but the web apps index.get. But you know, this is obviously a gross oversimplification, and you can think that, you know, there are really you know, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of steps, and you know, any diagram of what's happening over the internet is definitely going to be an oversimplification anyway. Now let's think about some of the terminology. When we talk about your browser, then, you know, we're probably talking about something that you use every single day, and generally we tend not to have a clue of what a browser is really, and you just think of your browser as the internet. And essentially your browser's job is to take your request, such as I want to see the contents of test.com, or any address that you type into the URL bar, and then use that information to make requests to the server at that address. Okay? And an address is essentially a URL, which stands for Uniform Resource Locator. This is a URL. So for example, test.com is a URL, and it indicates that where your browser should go. And the first part is the protocol. And once again, HTTP stands for Hypertext Protocol, and HTTPS stands for a Secure Hypertext Protocol. You have different protocols. For example, you have FTP, which stands for File Transfer Protocol. And you then have the host name, and the host name in this case is test.com. And again, you know, the DNS maps these host names to IP addresses, and you can think of IP addresses as phone numbers or as physical addresses. Okay, it's just a bunch of numbers that say this number has now been allocated to this domain. And for example, you also have an IP address. Your IP address tends to change every time you connect to the internet, whereas the IP addresses of servers are known as static IP addresses. And you know, if you sign up to a broadband provider or to a fiber provider, you can actually have options for static IP addresses as well, at which point you'll have an address that belongs to you and to you only. And then the rest of the address is actually, for example, if you said book, then that's the actual page that you are requesting, and then that's information that the web server knows how to deal with, and it goes and looks for the data for the book page, for example, as opposed to the root. We then have the connection part. You know, once the browser knows what protocol you want to use, which is HTTP or HTTPS in this case to be more specific, what server we're talking about, which is test.com, and what resource we want to get, which is the root, then it's essentially ready to make that connection, and the browser simply asks the operating system to open the port on the computer, and by default the port for the web is always 80. So when you don't see a port number, that means that we are actually indeed talking about port 80 by default. And when that works, the operating system hands back your program something that works like a file, okay, essentially an HTML file. But it's rather than opening a file from your disk, as you're quite used to doing, it's actually sending bits over a wire, bits and bytes over a wire. And you know, the same thing happens like when if you had a program running on your own machine, you know, you could have a program on localhost. Localhost means your current machine, 127.0.0.1. That also means your local machine. Okay. Now, since things are not running on your local machine, they're actually running on your username.codebase.tech. So we don't write localhost, okay? Now let's think about the request part of this little dance. So your browser is connected using the address you gave, and now it needs to ask for resource, the for example /book on the remote server. So if you give book, if you say you want book, then it's always understood that we are looking by default for index.html. Index.html is the default HTML file that's being looked for, and if you had something called, you know, hello.html, then that would be a valid address. But if you didn't include hello.html, by default the web server would look for index.html inside the book directory, for example, let's call it, okay? And of course, you know, you can request HTML files, but in fact, you can request just about anything. You could put like a movie, you could put an MP3, and in fact, in case you're curious, I'll show you how you can actually access your files directly via your browser. So as you know, there's the file browser. There's the file browser which we took a look at. Which is at file browser.codebase.tech. I'm sure you remember this, where you can say user and then codebase. But this is a program that tries and makes things a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more pretty. We can actually access this directly by going to static.codebase.tech/member file. Oops, actually that's not working. I don't know why. Forbidden, okay. Okay, never mind. Yeah, so I thought that was going to work, but it's not working. So once again, you know, if you want to take a look at your files directly, you can just head to filebrowser.codebase.tech. I wanted to show you a more simplified version of this, but for some reason it's not working. Now, also in terms of terminology, there is the server. And the server is essentially the computer at the end of the browser's connection, and that knows how to answer your browser's requests to files and resources. And the way that it does this is that the server actually knows your IP address, okay? And it makes pretty much the same request, but in reverse. Now, in this case, we're actually building a web server in Python, and it knows how to take requests and resources and then return strings that we are going to craft in Python. And when we do this crafting, we are pretending to be a file that's being sent to the browser, but it's really just code. And you'll see from exercise 50, it doesn't take much to create a coded response, okay? So we're pretending to be HTML pages, but we're not. We're just returning strings, and the browser does not actually know the difference as to whether it's serving in a static HTML page that's changing all the time, or whether it's just being sent code directly. I mean, actually it kind of does, because now we have ways of adding all that kind of information in the response, but technically it doesn't have to. And finally, we have the response part of the whole dance, and this is the HTML plus CSS plus JavaScript and images and other kind of resources that the server wants to send back to the browser as an answer to the browser's request. And in the case of files, it just reads them off the disk and sends them to the browser, although it's not like it reads them in one chunk and sends them in one chunk. It many you know, in actuality they'll kind of stream the contents of the file bit by bit. And it wraps that content into something called a special header. And so the browser actually knows what kind of data to expect. And in the case of our application, we're just sending the same thing, including the header, but we generate that data on the fly using Python. And yeah, that's Zedishaw mentions this is kind of like the fastest crash course on how web browsers access information and servers on the internet, and I agree, that was definitely a little bit quick, but it should help you to kind of understand what's going on in the exercise ahead, and if not, then you can read a lot more about how browsers actually work. Now let's make some quick changes to the code that we wrote in exercise 50. So that's Gothon Web, and I'm going to move this to Gothon Web Gothon Web underscore ex50. And now I'm going to copy this. I'm going to say cp-r Gothon Web exercise 50. I'm going to copy this. To Gothon Web exercise 51. And the reason is I skipped over the study drills, so in case I want to actually go back and do the study drills later on this week, I can just go back to the code the way that it was. And generally you'll see that the way that we would take a snapshot of the code, make some changes to it and be able to go back to that snapshot is by using Git. But since we don't know Git for now, I'll just use trusty old CP. And I'll just rename everything as I should inside exercise 51. And actually it's fine. I thought we would see, you know, something like exercise 50 in there, but we don't, so it's fine. Now, the thing we'll change is app.py. So I'll go back to my editor. I'll go inside projects, exercise 51, and app.py. And we shall make a little change here. On line 3, I'll say from Flask import request. And this will be root hello, and we'll change it from hello world to index. And let's get rid of this. And say name equals request.args.get, and we want to get the argument name, and if we don't get an argument name, then we'll say nobody. So that's a little bit like accessing dictionaries in Python, okay? In fact, you can be pretty sure that this is a dictionary, but maybe it isn't, we don't know. And now we'll say if name, then greeting equals format, hello, name, else, greeting equals hello world. And then, as we had earlier, we'll say return render template index.html greeting equals greeting. And that's it. And these are yesterday's nodes, so I'll just clear them for now. And I can't remember whether I actually saved my notes from earlier. Yes, I did. So I'll just copy those into exercise 51's app.py. Okay, there you go. Now let's restart our let's rerun the Flask server as we had yesterday. And if I remember correctly, it was Python 3 app.py no, that's it, Python 3 app.py, and let's just set ourselves in debug mode, which I don't think my history is working. Let's see, history grep export. Nope, so I'll say export flask underscore debug equals 1. Python 3 app.py. And now let's go back to codebase.tag, which is my user. Oops, there we go. And indeed, we wrote the hello path. And there it is. I just wanted to say hello nobody, and that's because we did not provide a name in the actual request. And I think what I'm going to do is just bring that down a little bit so you can actually see the URL inside the browser. Yeah, I think this should make this a little bit more clear. Now, the way that we would pass an argument, here is by saying question mark, and that tells the browser that we're about to pass in an argument, and I'll say name equals Frank. Name equals Frank, which is my grandfather's name. Name equals Frank. And now it says, hello Frank. And that's because, once again, just to be really clear, we are going inside the hello path, and that's defined by the function index, and then we get the name by asking the request object for its arguments. We get the argument name. If we don't have a name, then we come up back with nobody. And then we have a greeting, hello name, greeting equals hello world if we don't have a name, and then we do exactly the same thing as we were doing yesterday. So let's take a look at how to create proper forms in a web application, because obviously, you know, typing parameters inside the URL, inside the address bar of your browser is obviously completely absurd, and it's not the way to do it. I mean, you know, if you're a very advanced user, of course it's fine, you can go and type anything in there, but you know, for the average net user, that's obviously not at all workable. So that's not a problem, because there's actually a way of doing that inside your HTML file directly. Let's open our templates, and I think we'll actually create a new template. And we'll call this hello underscore form.html. And let's copy the contents of index, because it might save us a bit of time. I think I'll do that quickly. So hello form, I'll just paste the contents of index.html, which is our previous template. I'll remove this. So all I'm keeping is HTML, and actually I think I'll go ahead and indent that. So all we're keeping is this HTML open and close markup. I'm keeping the head. And the head, we are going to change the title. We are going to change the title to sample web form. And then in the body, we'll have an h1 tag, which is essentially a big header tag, as you'll see. And we shall write in there, fill out this form. And next we'll add a form tag, and same as with brackets in Python, one thing I tend to do is just create the open and close tag immediately, so I don't forget to close the tag, which is definitely problematic if you do. And then I'll say action equals hello. So that means after performing our action, we'll redirect the browser to the hello path. And then method equals post, because we'll post information to the web server, to your Python web server. Then we'll add some text, and the text will say a greeting. And then we'll add an input markup of type text. So we are inviting the user to type some text, and the name is greet. And you remember earlier we put this name and greet inside the URL directly, and now we're saying we want this input to land up in name greet, and that data will be sent via a form using the method post, and the action that we'll perform is actually redirecting the browser to the path hello. And now we'll add a line break. Your name, and I'll just copy and paste this one. Your name, input type text, name. Yes, sorry, earlier we passed in the name, we didn't pass greet. Now we're passing both. Add a new line break. And now we'll say input type equals submit. And input type submit is just a silent way of saying, ultimately we want to submit this, and this should be manifested in the form of a button. And that's it. We are done for our form template. And now we'll need to make a change to our app.py to actually handle this post data. So let's go back to app.py and exercise 51. And in hello path, we'll add methods equal a list, and the list contains post, and the list contains get. And we're still inside def index. Greeting is now, let's just actually clean this up just to not confuse matters and start over. And we'll say greeting equal hello world, if request.method equals post, name equal request.form name. And greet is request.form greet. We can then generate our greeting, which is format string greet name. And finally we return render template index.html with greeting equals greeting, else return render template hello form.html. And if it looks a little bit confusing, don't worry, we'll break down what this is actually doing. Let's just try this for now. Something wrong is happening. Let's take a look. We have a syntax error. And the reason we have a syntax error is because I did an equal instead of an equal. Let's relaunch that. Go to our portfolio site. And now we no longer need this name equals Frank. Let's get rid of that. Greeting. Hi Frank. Submit. I just wanted to say hi Frank. And now if we say hello somebody, I just wanted to say hello somebody. So now we're seeing this whole process of sending form data to your program, and then generating an HTML document based on that input and returning it to the browser. So I did mention we would actually talk a little bit more about what we've just typed in. So let's break it down really carefully. As you remember, when we first, you see when I want to refresh this, it says, do we want to confirm form resubmission? And I'll hit cancel, and I'll simply instead go inside my address bar, press enter. And now we're bringing in, you know, the same document. This is the same HTML document. It's just that we've got some different, you know, conditional logic based on what data is being passed in. And in this case, we are performing a GET request, so we're not performing a POST request. And let's see what happens on the server side. On the server side, we have our greeting, and then we check if the method is a POST. So remember, when we just invoke the page, it's not actually doing a POST, it's doing a GET. That means we don't enter this conditional block, and instead we enter this conditional block, at which point we say render template hello form.html. Now let's take a look at hello form.html, and here you can see that we have a form, we have an h1, and then we have a form action hello. Yeah, and that's hello form.html. Remember this. So again, let's go back to app.py, and you know, when we perform a GET request, because we can perform a POST or a GET. So essentially, a GET, you're saying I just want to get some data, whereas a POST, you're saying I'm submitting some data to this page. So when we just load the page, we perform a GET, and when we perform a GET, we say return render template hello form. And hello form, once again, is that form, okay? So that's why when we're inside here and we just refresh it at your username.codebase.tech/hello, we are getting this form to fill out. Now, when we actually write something, hi Frank, and submit, that data gets posted, okay? And what that means is that if we open app.py, we'll now see that we invoke the same route, but we invoke it with a POST method. So when we reach line 11, we ask Flask, what kind of method did we use on that request? Well, that method is a POST. So we enter this conditional block, at which point we say name equals request.form. So what data did the user type inside the form's field called name, and that's the name, and then same for greet. Then we generate that greeting, and we render index.html with our greeting. And just a quick reminder, index.html looks like this, where we just say hi with the data that was essentially passed in to greeting. Yeah, because greeting here, remember that we formatted that to be, you know, hello name. So now greeting is hi Frank. Now the next thing to bear in mind is that we'll want to create a layout template, and what this means is that, you know, if we build a kind of big complex web application, it will get tedious to write a new HTML file every single time that you have a new page that you want to display. And that's the reason why we actually have templates. It's because we can programmatically pass in some data, and we'll want to do the same thing with the layout of our page. So if we want to make our pages look pretty, we'll probably want to put that inside an HTML file called layout.html, for example, do some pretty things in there, and then embed hello form or index.html inside that layout. And that's what we're going to look at today. Quick changes, and I am going to change both hello form and index. And the changes that we are going to make are, let's start with index. And actually it's a bit, yeah, I'll cut this, so I'll keep it inside my my copy and paste buffer. I'll remove this body HTML, and then at the top I'll say extends layout.html then block content and finally end block. Now what this is saying is that here we extend layout.html, so we are suggesting that we are going to create layout.html. So just bear in mind for now, because once you see layout.html and how everything works together, it makes a lot more sense. And now that we've declared that we are going to extend layout.html, we have a block called content. And essentially that's the content that goes inside our block content. So if you wanted to, you could even maybe indent this if it makes things a little bit clearer in your mind. Okay? And now we'll do the same to hello form.html. We can safely remove this and remove this. And once again, extends layout.html block content. And do be very careful, because when we say extend, as you can see, we're using quotes, and when we say the block, we don't use a quote, so be very careful there. And then the rest is exactly how we had it before. And then finally here we'll say end block, end block. And we should be good to go. And once again, if it just kind of helps you visualize things a little bit better, you can actually indent this. Let me check what I did inside index. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. I don't know why this is indented. Let's bring it back. There we go. And now let's create layout.html. Layout.html. We can paste that from earlier. Let's make sure that we close our body, and let's make sure that we close our HTML markups. And here, essentially, this is our boilerplate. This is our boilerplate, okay? And inside our body, we shall add blog content and end block, simply meaning that whatever's passed into this template that's called content will end up here. So this file looks like a regular template, except that it's being passed the contents from another template and used to wrap them. Anything that you put in here, doesn't need to be in the other templates, yeah? So let's take a look at the result inside our portfolio site. Let's refresh this. Yes, let's just press enter here on the address bar, and I'll say, hello, Bill. And that works exactly as before, but let's check, because let's check that it's actually doing what we expect it to do. And inside our layout, let's say h1 from the layout h1 and yeah, now we have it from the layout. Hello, Bill. And again, we have this from the layout. So essentially, we have factorized the boilerplate out into layout.html, and when we make that those changes inside layout.html, they will appear in all our pages in which we use the extends template methodology and a block called content. The final thing that we are going to do is take a look at how to write automated tests for forms, because you can test a page by going in there and typing stuff in, but we're developers, we like automating things, okay? So in the next step, we are going to write a little test for our web application. And we'll do that inside the tests directory, okay? Let's create a new file and call this app_tests.py. Open up app tests, and I'll say from nose.tools import star from app import app.config testing equals true, web equals app.test client def test index rv equals web.get the root path follow redirects equals true. Now just to be clear, follow redirects is because you can have redirections in web pages where you go to a web page and then the HTML document says, no, actually, now that web page has moved over to this other address, and then it's like, keep on following these redirects until you get to an actual web page that doesn't contain a redirect, get the HTML data and get it back. Whereas, if you don't have this follow redirects, then if there is a redirection, then you won't get the data that you're after. Now assert equal rv.status code 404, and then rv equal, I'll just copy this one and I'll copy actually both lines. And here I'll say hello, and this line assert equal rv.statuscode equals 404. I'm sure that you've seen 404 before, and essentially 404 is when you type in the address of something on the web and it's not the right page. Let's say you typed something wrong and the web server says, look, this doesn't actually exist, okay? And status code 200 says that indeed you got a valid response back from the web browser, and we no longer have a root path, and instead we only have hello, and that's why we expect 404 from the root path and we expect 200 from hello. We'll then say assert in fill out this form rv.data. So assert in means that in rv.data, which is the response that we get back from invoking hello, somewhere in there will be a string that says fill out this form. We'll then say data equals name Pardon me, pardon my throat. Z greet holla and then rv equals web dot post to the path hello and again follow redirects true data equal data assert in z rv.data and then assert in holla is also going to be in the response. I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. So let's just cover this again. We import nose.tools, we import everything from nose.tools, we import our app. So we need to make sure that we run it from the directory gothon web exercise 51. We then create a web application from app.testclient. And then we have test index, which is just a function. And in here, we perform a request and we make sure that it's 404 if we're on the root. Then we make a request to hello and we make sure that we get a 200 response. And then we also check that we have fill out this form inside the response from the get request to /hello. Then we create a dictionary that contains the data that we shall be posting. Then we post that data to /hello. We post that data to /hello, and we check that in the response we have Z and holla, which is what's been passed in. So let's test this and let's see if it actually performs what we expect. And that actually might be tricky because I would need to create a different instance. Like I would need two terminals to test this out. One terminal where the application is running and another terminal where I can actually run the automated tests. Now, luckily enough, there is actually a way of doing this, and that's by doing Control-Z on your keyboard. And when you press Control-Z on your keyboard, you can see it says stopped Python3 app.py. Control-Z has not killed the application, it's actually stopped the application. Now what we want is we want that application to run in the background. And to do that, I'll type, sorry, this banner is in the way. I'll do clear, and I'll type bg. Now, Python3 app.py is now running in the background. That means that we have access to our terminal once again, and the application is still running. Okay? There we go. We can even see the output. So let's try this. Nose tests. Oh, nose no longer exists. Pip install nose. And that failed. What went wrong? Fill out this form not found, so maybe I got the capitalization wrong. Let's check. Yeah. So here I have a small o, and here I had a capital O. So once again, if you think back right at the start of the book, Z.A. Shaw tells us that one of the core skills of what we're doing is actually to spot differences on the screen. That's a really clear example, okay? I move my eyes, I scan the screen constantly, and I know kind of where to try and look for differences. So when I see a big block of code like this, it looks really scary to be faced with an error like this. But I actually scan really quickly until I see something like assert. I remember typing assert earlier. I remember typing this out earlier. And then comparing that with what we have here and spotting the difference very quickly. So you need to build up your skill at spotting differences. So let's make that change. That takes capital O. Let's run it again. And that now passes. So we now have tested that the application indeed works the way that it should. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll probably just record exercise 52 next, and then once we've once we have all the exercises, I'll go back and I'll look at the study drills that I've skipped to make sure that we actually have everything that we need. And since these are actually pre-recorded sessions, I think what we'll do is we'll have some live Q&A sessions, which will just be focused around you asking questions, and we won't actually I won't provide any new content, and instead all we are going to do in these Q&A sessions is you can write down your questions, prepare your questions for things that confuse you, and we'll just freestyle over your questions until we've elucidated all of them. So I hope that will work well as a substitute for the live lessons, which we are no longer having. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye bye.